Um, it does feel like the Trump administration is thinking that a war in Venezuela. I mean, I don't even know what that would look like.
It
I
would
guess it would
look
matter like
absolutely horrifying.
it
And it might
would.
actually also, unlike the fake lying one, legitimately create some type of region-wide migration crisis, which God knows the Bolsonaro government would already respond to obscenely what's already trickling out of Venezuela.
But here is Mike Pompeo, and look, there's a lot of reasons in terms of the domestic politics you could imagine why the Trump administration would want to get involved in a war. Now, I happen to believe that as effective as these things were back in the day for distracting the American public, this is just not going to cut it. So here's Mike Pompeo in front of the United Nations, sitting behind him, if I'm not mistaken. Is that Elliot Abrams behind him?
Yep, Elliot Abrams is the point man on Venezuela for the administration.
Now, I don't know if people remember Elliot Abrams. Well, let's listen to what Pompeo says first.
The United States stands with the Venezuelan people. So far, many other nations have chosen to do the same, and they too have recognized the legitimate government of interim President Guaido. The United States stands proudly with you as we stand together in support of Venezuela. You knew the Venezuelan people did not have a moment to spare. And now it's time for every other nation to pick a side. No more delays, no more games. Either you stand with the forces of freedom or you're in league with Maduro and his mayhem.
There you go. The forces of freedom. Where have we heard that before? Elliot Abrams sitting behind here. We just keep that image of him up there because this is like Elliot Abrams was Reagan's point man, or one of them, in the Iran-Contra affair. He just coincidentally was pardoned by George Herbert Walker Bush, and ultimately, I think Herbert Walker Bush avoided his implications or being implicated in that scandal. Elliot Abrams was also one of the early architects of the Iraq War. He was, I remember one particular story where he had called in a bunch of evangelical Christians and basically told them that we need to do this. And they were, I think, upset about maybe this was endangering Israel in some way. And they're like, oh, no, we need to do this because of the apocalypse coming, something to that effect. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm quite sure that during the Reagan era, Elliot Abrams was implicated as a guy who was in who was helping with death squads.
He helped
down
in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, across. I mean, this guy's crimes and facilitation of just brutality and mass killing in the Reagan era in Central America is unparalleled. And it is like, and also, I mean, him and Otto Rice played a major role in the Bush administration's Latin America policy too. But there is just something like, you know, there's no even pretend that the end game that they're envisioning is death squads and mass cleanup if the right wing takes control in Venezuela.
He was running like in Congress. He had some role. He wasn't in Congress. He was part of the Reagan administration, and he was basically trying to make sure that I think it was Guatemalan. I think it was the Guatemalan president. I think he was president, could get funds because he was accused of basically trying to kill off indigenous people in Guatemala.
They did.
And
sure did.
He was trying to make sure, running interference in Congress to make sure that funds were not cut off to him. I mean, there's more, and I got to go back and
he
read.
Specifically tried to whitewash a massacre of 1,000 men, women, and children by U.S.-funded death squads in El Salvador. That's the main big, the big one. The Guatemala stuff is real. It was indigenous villages. I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, the young girl that was recently killed or died in ICE custody, if you recall, one of these, she was indigenous. She wasn't Spanish speaking. Yes. I think that might be the same group that we were supporting massacre in the 80s. So, I mean, Elliot Abrams is one of the great criminal, just obscene, disgusting people of our time. And of course, he helped finance the Contras as well.
We talk about accountability for these people when they're in office and why it was so dangerous that that Barack Obama basically said, turn the page on this. Part of the problem is metaphorically, you're not holding the elite to account, and it can create more problems in the future. The other problem is actually really practical in that they bring these people back again and again and again. Steve Mnuchin ends up being Treasury Secretary. He should have been in jail.
And that should really, look, again, I think ironically the lane that's staked out on opposing a coup and supporting a diplomatic process is moderate and obvious. But a lot of Democratic leaders have still gone on board with this. Yep. And a lot of even, liberal commentators are prevaricating and playing false equivalencies. And, it should have been obvious you never support a U.S. coup to begin with. But the Elliot Abrams role should be, you should be done.
Should be red flaggy. But now the good news, we're told, about America's, sort of beating the drums for a war with Venezuela, basically what would creating a civil war with Venezuela, it seems to me, is that it would bring this country together. You don't believe me? Ask Hugh Hewitt, MSNBC contributor.
Word cloud. The next 33 weeks allow the opportunity to go big and solve this. Jared Kushner is leading it, and it is far more important to shut down the Maduro government than our government. And I think Donald Trump is leading there, and he is winning there because of Bolton and Pompeo going down to see Bolsonaro and Duque. That's going to happen. That's going to bring us together.
That is going to bring us together?
I think America
getting involved in a Latin American politics that has never gone well for the United States
absolutely, because
in years past?
Russia is against that.
I understand
Trump is for that, and that will help. That will help a lot.
I think that
All right. There's
how is this man allowed on television?
There's Chuck Todd basically saying, the subtext of which is like, are you out of your mind? That's going to, I think what Hugh Hewitt's trying to say, like, that should be a distraction. If we see Donald Trump actually getting involved directly in Latin America, and I saw a report earlier that said that we had gotten involved in the past 100 years or so from a John H. Coatsworth, Harvard Review of Latin America. From 1898 to 1994, the U.S. government has intervened successfully to change governments in Latin America a total of at least 41 times. That amounts to once every 28 months for an entire century. Now, let's take a look at how Latin America is doing. Right? Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. Society has, in many respects, civil society has broken down in many respects. That's why we see so many people from these countries trying to, risk everything to get out of those countries.
There's waves of it, right? We go back to the 50s and Eisenhower, those infamous Guatemala coup, and the 70s, Chile's the big thing. But then through the 70s and 80s, we helped fund, they're called the Condor years. We literally helped right-wing governments coordinate the mass murder of everybody on the left.
Yep.
And not just, of course, I feel like I shouldn't even need to make this distinction, but just this point of clarity, not just leftist guerrillas were they slaughtering. They were slaughtering, first of all, any villages where those guerrillas might be, but also slaughtering the equivalent of Rachel Maddow. I'm a liberal and I have some qualms with the government. Well, you're going to get a bullet in your head from regimes that we supported. And even as one example, like the Brazilian regime we supported through the 80s, it's always reported here that they killed less people than rivaling regimes, and that's partially true. But what isn't included in the estimates is mass slaughter of indigenous people.
Right.
And now we're on the next wave of it, because there's no doubt that the U.S. foreign policy shifted towards reversing the pink tide. And in 2009, when Obama and Clinton signed off on that coup in Honduras, that was the reversal. And that shows up in Brazil. And they never stopped trying to undermine Venezuela. I mean, the sanctions on Venezuela have been vicious under Bush, Obama, and obviously Trump.